Hello, welcome to True Crime Kitchen with Delicious Neil. Here we cook amazing indigenous recipes and we also tell true crime stories from around the world. Today's story is from the heart of Akwa Ibom State, a town of Itam. And for our recipe today, I will be making jollof rice with peppered chicken. And I'm just going to season my chicken and let it cook, and then I'll roast it in my oven alongside with my tomato and pepper mix and just fry it up and make my jollof rice. So let's get back to our story. So it's just a story about how love turned bitter with suspicion that spiraled into horror and a life that ended far too far. It's a story about two people who found themselves, fell in love, fell out of love, and then committing a forbiddable crime. And in this story, we have a young man named Ubon. Ubon is a 31-year-old man who is an aluminium fabricator. And it's just a trade that has kept him busy and didn't really fetch much for him, but it kept him going. He was known to be very hardworking. He's a quiet and unassuming man. And so this man fell in love with a young girl of 22 years old, Emem, who was a pattern medicine dealer. Yes, and she was just a young girl who had a whole life ahead of her. She was beautiful, she was vibrant, she brought a kind of life into his life. And both of them had been in a relationship for 2 years. So that means when he met her, he was 29 and she was 20. And just like every other relationship, they had their ups and downs. They had their moments of joy. They had their moments of sadness. They quarreled and settled, but they stayed. And along the line, Ubon asked her to move into his apartment. Not like he had a very big apartment. He was living in a one-room apartment. So that means they shared the kitchen, they shared the convenience, but they had a room to themselves, yeah. And so his girlfriend, Emem, moved into with him, now his fiance, and they were both living together and everything was going well. They both went to work from their homes and came back, and it was peaceful until they had a new neighbor who moved in. This neighbor in Sisong. And after this neighbor moved in, it became the fuel that, caused a lot of friction in the relationship between Ubon and Emem, because Ubon, for some reason, started suspecting that Emem was having an affair with Nsesong. So back to my recipe, you can see my tomato mix. I have here my tomato, I have pepper, I have onion, I have some garlic. So I'm just going to sprinkle some oil and just toast it in my oven and allow it to roast. And while my chicken is cooking, and when my chicken cook all through, I'll transfer it to the rack and then put it in the oven alongside with the pepper and tomato mix. So let's continue. So as time went on, the relationship began to, cool. The affection started growing weaker, and the couple just fought every time. And then one night, it became dawn on Ubon that he couldn't take it anymore. And then their neighbor that Ubon was suspecting was just a neighbor who lived few doors down. And though there was just nothing more than a casual acquaintance, Ubon just convinced himself that there was just something going on between him and Emem. And every time he watches them, their innocence exchange was just something that made his jealousy to grow wild. And so for Emem, she didn't know what was going on Ubon's mind. She just went about her day as usual. She went to work, she met her friends, she came back home, thinking that she's coming back to the man that she loved. And even though she noticed that Ubon was more distant, more withdrawn, she just felt it was stress from the day's job. And being that he had a hard kind of job, she just felt it was just stress that was making him distant. And even though they had argued about the whole infidelity stuff, that she's cheating on him with the neighbor, and she had, continuously denied it because there was actually really nothing going on between them. But Ubon was not having it. He just felt that there was something and he just couldn't do away with that jealousy. And then something happened on the night of December 5th. He went to bed, and about 3 a.m. in the morning, Ubon decided to make a move. While the room was just very dark with only the lights from the security lamps from outside, Ubon just couldn't bear the anger in his heart anymore. And so he woke up, he just slipped away from the bed, and it was actually very deliberate not to wake Emem up. And the next thing was he settled on his aluminium drilling machine. It's actually his work tool and he was very familiar with it. But this night he used it for something else. And so he just took the machine. There was light, and so he just plugged it into the wall and then sliced off her neck from her head using this machine. And at that moment, it dawned on him what he had done. With blood splashing everywhere, on the walls, on the bed, on the floor, on his clothes, his fingers, he was covered in blood, and the whole room was just filled with blood. He just knew that at that moment that there was no escaping for him, and he thought to himself what he was going to do to, get out of that situation that his anger has led him to. And so he broke the ceiling in his room and then left the room through the ceiling. And he just ran. He just kept running until it was morning. And by the time morning came, he just spotted the nearest police station and went into it. So back to my recipe. My tomato is grilling, or is it roasting, alongside with the chicken cut. And then I'm just going to prep my vegetable, because I like to include vegetables in my dishes. I love them, especially carrots. So carrots, green peppers, I just love them. But for this recipe, I was using just carrots and a lot of onions. So let's go back to our story. And so Ubon found the nearest police station, went in and decided to report the case. But when he was assigned an officer for him to report his case, he narrated that in the middle of the night, armed robbery attacked the compound, attacked his room, and unalived his girlfriend, and he only just managed to escape. So the police officer listened to him narrate the story, but at this point, they knew something was missing. He was all covered up in blood. How come the armed robbers didn't harm him? So they escorted him back to their room, which has now become a crime scene. And when they got in there, they saw Emem all covered up in our blood. They saw the machine that was used all covered up in blood. Everything was covered in blood. There was a trail from the blood to the ceiling and everything. And then they launched an investigation. And during the investigation, the fingerprints that match on the blood, there was investigation showed that there was no other person in the room, so there couldn't have been any armed robbers. And so Ubon was arrested, and the case was charged to court, and then trial began. Now the case was taken to the High Court, and then the trial lasted for weeks, and details were all laid out for all to see. Emem's family were present. They were all filled with grief and anger, and Ubon's family was also present, but their spirits were really broken. And so the case went on and on. Witnesses were called, testimonies were heard, and finally it was time for the judgment to be called. And so on the day of the judgment, everybody were anxious. The whole of the community trooped into court. They were just waiting to hear what the verdict was going to be and what judgment the justice was going to give. And after like 3 hours of reading through the judgments, the judge finally gave the verdict, which was unaliving Ubon by hanging. And let's just say that at the end of the day, justice was served, the family was happy, the state was happy, but then a life was lost. So tell me, what do you think about this story? And I hope you get to try my jollof rice recipe. I'll see you in my next video. Bye. Don't forget to subscribe as I'll be bringing you more intriguing stories and recipes.